Dear Gabby, Christmas doesn't seem special to me anymore. When I was young, it was all about me getting presents. There was an extraordinary feeling of expectation and wonder about the whole season. But now, as a young adult, I still get presents, and I give them too, but there's no sort of magical feeling like there was when I was a child. I know it's about celebrating the birth of Jesus, even though we don't know when he was born, but for some reason, my Christmas is missing something indefinable, and I'm not sure what it is. Do you have any ideas for me? Sincerely, Missing the Magic in Mississippi. Dear Mrs. Mississippi, for several Christmases after my dear Harry and I discovered our infertility, we also lost that special Christmas feeling. We were in mourning, of course, for the children we knew we'd never have, and neither of us could find that special feeling that had always accompanied the season before. Then, the Christmas my brother Stanley and his silly wife Shirley moved back to our town, we found a bit of it again. Harry and I had made their children handmade gifts, and we were very excited about giving them to the gifts. Unfortunately, Stanley and Shirley's children were spoiled by abundance and barely glanced at our simple gifts before tossing them carelessly to the floor and reaching for the next package. So when they were all done, Harry found our gifts discarded among the wrapping paper, and once we collected our coats, we left. And that's when the magic began. We drove directly to the Pendergrass orphanage across town and knocked on the door. A tired-looking woman in a stained apron answered the door. "Yes," she said impatiently. "What do you want?" Harry smiled at her. His smiles were legendary for their beauty, and I'm not just saying that because I loved him. "We're Harry and Gabby Van Burden, and we have a few toys we'd like to give to some of the children." The lady thawed out a little bit when she heard that, so she opened the door and beckoned us in. There we saw 16 children of various ages seated at 3 tables, each eating a thin soup and a hunk of bread. They were all painfully thin with ill-fitting clothes. They looked at us curiously as we stood there in our warm coats, carrying our bag with 5 little handmade presents. Harry and I weren't sure what to do at first, but then we both saw a darling little girl, maybe 3 years old, looking at us with hopeful eyes. Harry strode over to her, squatted down, and reaching into the bag, he handed her the doll. "Merry Christmas," he said to her in his gorgeous voice with his gorgeous smile. The little girl, we later found out that her name was Eleanor, looked with disbelief at the doll in her arms and then back at Harry. He nodded at her, still smiling. All the other kids and the lady with the tired eyes watched in rapt silence. "What do you say?" said the tired-looking woman to the little girl. "Thank you very much, mister," she whispered. "You're very, very welcome," he answered. Too quickly, all 5 of our toys had been distributed, and when Harry and I saw the faces of the other children, he said to the lady, "We'll be right back, okay?" She nodded. We sped home and tore through our house looking for a dozen other gifts we could give. We found handkerchiefs and books and hair bows. We didn't know where they came from, but we also found a couple of balls, a set of jacks, a tin full of colorful marbles. Harry found a sweater that was too small for him, a pair of blue suspenders, and 3 pairs of brand new gloves. And at the last minute, I grabbed my brand new bottle of perfume I just received from Harry the night before. Then we headed to our kitchen to see what treats we could find there. While Harry was out on the porch finding some crates to pack everything in, I piled food onto the table. We had ham and quite a bit of leftover chicken. Of course, we had a lot of fruit and vegetables, and my sweet mama had dropped off a couple of pies earlier in the day, 1 apple and 1 pumpkin, that Harry and I definitely did not need. There was bread and eggs and 3 jugs of milk. I even pulled out my hoard of candy sticks hidden behind the bread box, and lo and behold, there were exactly 17 pieces. After packing up everything and loading it into the car, we quickly drove back to the orphanage. This time, as we pulled up in front, we saw many faces pressed against the windows. "Wait right here," Harry said to me as he got out of the car and went to the door. A moment later, he returned with 2 gangly boys following him. After he'd helped me out of the car, he and the boys carried the crates of goodies into the building. I followed behind with the 2 pies. What happened that afternoon still gives me goosebumps when I remember it. Oh my, there's no delight like the magic of giving to people who are really needy. One at a time, Harry pulled out our last-minute gifts out of the crate, and then looking around the room, he'd find the child who seemed to match that gift. It was amazing to see how we seemed to have just the right gift for each child. All eyes in the room would follow his every move as he presented each one with a smile, a softly spoken Merry Christmas, and a gift. And when he got to the bottom of the crate, his eyes widened when he saw the familiar perfume I'd hidden there. But with a small shrug and a wink in my direction, he took his legendary smile over to May, the surprisingly young, tired-looking woman, and with a courtly bow, he offered her a Merry Christmas and the brand new bottle of perfume. "This is for me?" she said, shocked. "That is for you," he acknowledged, bowing once again. "Oh my goodness," she said, lifting the beautiful bottle to her nose to breathe in the lovely aroma. "Are you sure?" At his nod, she began to cry. Not loud, sobbing cries, but she cried very softly, tears dripping off her chin as she told Harry and me about growing up in the orphanage herself and how, when she got old enough, she began to work there, and how one by one all the other workers had moved on until she was left alone to care for all the children. There was some funding from a couple of organizations, but it was all never enough to provide for the children the way she wanted to. She told us how that Christmas time was always the hardest because the children knew that kids with families were receiving gifts and eating special treats on that day. "Treats!" I interrupted her. "I forgot the treats." I ran up to the kitchen, tripping over a couple of tow-headed boys comparing marbles by the doorway, and pulled out my stash of candy. And then it was my turn. I experienced the joy personally 17 times as I handed each one, including May, a sweet piece of candy. After that, Harry sat down on the hard wooden chair and asked if he could borrow the book of short stories from the young girl who had received it, and began to read aloud. Before long, the room was silent, except for the sound of Harry's voice, the pages turning, and the occasional slurp of candy being eaten. I slipped out to the kitchen to see about preparing a very special meal for everyone. When story time was over and the sun was beginning to set in the west, the kids and May and Harry came into the kitchen to see the feast set out on the tables. Eleanor's big sister Lillian, who was all of 5, was granted permission to bless the food. She climbed up on her chair, bowed her head, and began to pray. "Dear God," she said, speaking loudly so everyone, including God, could hear her, "thank you for this big heap of food for us to eat. Thank you for giving us the best Christmas we've ever had. Thank you for my pretty kerchief, and for Eleanor's doll, and John's spinders, and for Samuel's new toy plane, and for George's sweater, and for all these presents. You're a very good God to bless us so much on your birthday. Amen." "Amen," chorused 18 other voices. "Amen," said Harry again, smiling at me from the other side of the room. "Amen," I repeated, feeling the wonder of Christmas down to my toes. For the next 20-something years, Harry and I repeated that wondrous feeling by spending Christmas at Pendergrass Orphanage. But we didn't wait until the holiday season to give to these dear children. We went back, week after week, delivering food and clothing and getting to know each of the children and their sad stories. We got other people involved with our giving too, remembering the joy we felt and wanting others to experience that same thing. Our church got involved in Harry's company and even our neighbors. And when the project became too big for us, we handed it off to Stanley's son, who'd grown up and somehow caught the giving spirit by hearing our stories. And he's still in charge of organizing one of the biggest holiday giving programs in our part of the country. You may have read a story in the Guidepost magazine a few years back. So what happened to May? Harry and I helped finance her evening college classes, arranging alternative care for the children while she studied, and she earned a degree in nursing. And a few years later, my dear Harry had the thrilling opportunity to escort her down the aisle when she married that handsome missionary, Wendell Schultz. So, Mrs. Mississippi, if you want to recapture the wonder of Christmas, I'd like to suggest that you find someone who will only experience Christmas if you provide it for them. Just last year, I was told of a family who lost their jobs and weren't going to have gifts to exchange, so I coerced Stanley's granddaughter Jennifer to take me to the store so I could find a few small gifts for them. I tell you, there's nothing like it. Harry and I learned well from our experience with Pendergrass Orphanage where the Christmas feeling comes from. It's all about the giving. Sincerely sincere, Gabby.